So, despite what people will try to tell you when you go and talk to them about love, it isn't difficult, it isn't complicated to define. You don't need to be Bertrand Russell to understand it. It is really, really simple and direct action, which is directed at the welfare of other people and not at your own welfare. Okay, welcome back. As before, I am not a priest, but I do have a couple of priest-analogous things to get through, so let's get into it. Having said in the previous video that love one another is the only scripture that ever was, the only gospel that should ever have been, the only spiritual path that exists, the only spiritual practice of any genuine worth, and having invited people who would try to tell you more than that and confuse you with additional information, people who are dressed more or less like this or in some analogous fashion, to shut the hell up, apart from preaching that gospel, you might have thought that I would have taken my own advice and just shut the hell up. The only reason that I'm continuing to speak is because when I say something as simple as love one another, I encounter a really significant problem, and that is that in a world such as this one, a world that is fundamentally profane, that is fundamentally degraded and debased from a spiritual point of view, when I say even the word love in this spiritual context, people don't know what I'm talking about. So I have to attempt some kind of a definition of the term in order to make the injunction accessible and understandable and able to be followed by ordinary people. It's a very interesting phenomenon to observe that when you speak to people about love in this context, and when you postulate something that I've been postulating to people, that love one another is the only gospel that exists, people adopt a very, very strange attitude. So most people will have completely unfounded opinions on just about any topic you can imagine. And these unfounded opinions will be incredibly strong, incredibly blunt, and incredibly dearly held to that person. So whether you're talking about politics, let's say Trump or Biden, when you're talking about just about any topic that people might have an opinion on, they're all like, oh no, I bloody know this is the truth. It's not that, it's this one. Oh, that's the truth. It's bloody this way and it can't be any other way. It's, And yet, when you postulate a really simple spiritual proposition about love and the primacy of love and love one another being the only gospel, it's amazing. People suddenly turn into Bertrand Russell. Bertrand bloody Russell. As large as life in the King's Road. So they begin to say things like, oh yes, love. Oh, it's such a difficult concept to even begin to address, and there are so many facets to it that must be explored and unpacked, and perhaps even to expect to be able to postulate a definition is almost impossible and could be an exercise in hubris, blah, 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 blah. It's absolutely amazing. I really recommend trying it sometime. Go and speak to a person and put love on the table and say, what do you think about it? And they will immediately dissemble in that fashion and tell you how complicated a topic it is and how much nuance it has and how difficult a definition would be. It's astonishing. They turn into Bertrand bloody Russell. Love in this context is not a difficult thing to define. Love generally is actually quite simple too. So if you want to have a look at what love is, what the different facets of love might be, Erich Fromm devoted his entire life to studying that subject and adjacent subjects. He wrote a book called The Art of Love, or The Art of Loving, and it goes through not a great number, but a significant number of different types of love. So from a parent to a child, intimate love, sort of comradeship or brotherhood, those sorts of things. But as simple as that concept really is when it's subjected to proper analysis, the love that I'm talking about in terms of this injunction is even more simple. And you can define it as follows. Love is any action of the body, including speech, that is genuinely directed at the welfare of another person and not at your own welfare. That's it. I'll say it again. Love is any action of the body, including speech, that is genuinely directed at the welfare of another person or people and not towards your own welfare. There are not many elements to that definition. Firstly, it's an action. Love in this sense is a verb, but you knew that anyway because the injunction or the commandment or the directive uses love as a verb. Love one another. It's a direction to do something. So it's any action of the body, including speech, directed at the welfare of another person and not your own welfare. Really, really simple. In some contexts, that might be called altruism. There's been a bit of philosophical work around that topic, even trying to make it more complicated than it really is. But I think the best way to understand it in this spiritual context is merely to talk about the actions which we all know constitute loving behavior. So the primary one, in some senses, is kindness, being kind. But there are a number of similar exemplars, so kindness, generosity, hospitality, supportiveness, giving someone counsel, kind words, help, material or otherwise. All of these simple actions that are directed at a person other than yourself and directed at making them feel better, relieving their suffering, basically making their life a little bit better. So, for example, making someone a cup of tea. I mean, that's about the simplest example I can think of. If they're looking a little bit peaky and you think they might benefit from a cup of tea, just asking them to sit down and making them a cup of tea and bringing it to them, perhaps with a piece of chocolate or a little bit of cake or something they might like. That is an example of love in this spiritual sense. It doesn't have to be highfalutin. What I'm really talking about are the basic obligations that are upon all humble and ordinary people within any genuine religious tradition. So, for example, in the Catholic tradition, which is my tradition, the Corporal Works of Mercy are the primary example. So they're very, very simple. They're very, they can be time-consuming, they can be demanding, but there's nothing complicated about them. So we talk about housing the homeless, clothing the naked, feeding the hungry, healing the sick, comforting the dying, and burying the dead. These sorts of very basic obligations, which everybody understands as a human being, are very important to observe. And those basic obligations that are upon any humble Muslim person or any humble Catholic person or someone from the Bahai faith, these are not essentially any different from one another. All of these obligations are the same obligation, and they come back essentially to the obligation to love one another, to use your body, your gifts, what you've brought into the world, not just to benefit yourself, and in fact not primarily to benefit yourself, but to benefit and relieve the suffering of other people. So that's basically that. So despite what people will try to tell you when you go and talk to them about love, it isn't difficult, it isn't complicated to define. You don't need to be Bertrand Russell to understand it. It is really, really simple and direct action, which is directed at the welfare of other people and not at your own welfare.